quarterback Desperation Tiers. Wrote this up for the site. And here's sort of the context of it. Last year, I built it out as sure things. I think the Panthers are the only sure thing. Then I had why not, and like broke down why a bunch of teams could or a bunch of teams couldn't, because I think you had a lot more sort of like this feels like the quarterbacks are really being jammed at the top of this draft. And then so the next year they would if they could. I mean, do you agree that I actually think the Patriots are in their separate thing. It's like sort of a sure thing because of spite. Like they want to get that franchise quarterback in place before Belichick gets another job, because this offseason is flipped on Robert Kraft to the point where Patriots fans are like mad at him. They think he unnecessarily threw Belichick under the bus with the whole dynasty, documentary. And so I think if you're New England, you kind of have to take a quarterback, even if maybe it would be behoove you to trade back and acquire more picks or get a stud wide receiver. I think you have to take the quarterback, right?
Yeah, I would think they would take one for sure this year. I mean, Jacoby Brissett, I think they're comfortable with him if he has to start this season. He's proven he could be a good spot starter and even keep you, competitive while you try to bring up the young guy. But I think this is a scenario, depending how the draft board falls, and we kind of all assume it's going to be Caleb and Jaden at the 1 and 2 picks. They're not in love with Drake May. To your point, well, I could see them trading back and maybe even taking a filler on somebody like Spencer Rattler on day 2 to sit behind Jacoby Brissett. So just imagine if they were able to trade back and get, a blue chip tackle and a blue chip receiver. I think that's a great draft for the Patriots. And then, try to attack that quarterback in the second round.
Jacoby, I do think that it'll be interesting to see who's there at 3 for them.
Yes.
And if they decide to sit and take that quarterback, or if they do trade back, because to Lejay's point, they do need multiple positions. This is not a roster that, fares extremely well compared to the other teams within the division. So you talked about a playmaker, wide receiver. That's a spot. Maybe the offensive line is another position you look at. The defense is pretty good for the most part, but you'd have to think that at some point you have to address the quarterback position. Even if Jacoby can take you this year, the question really becomes like, what are you selling? Life after Tom Brady was, hey, we're drafting a first-round quarterback. We haven't had to do that over the 20 seasons with Tom Brady. Well, we're doing it now. That's how you're putting butts in the seats and selling tickets, right?
Yeah.
Well, the documentary is over. Obviously, Belichick's moved on. Like, what are we selling now if you're the New England Patriots? So to the point about maybe Robert Kraft or Bobby Kraft, Bobby Orchids, whatever you want to call it, whether it's saving face or whatever you want to call it, they've got to sell something. And I think that's the tough thing is this roster's got some holes. They want to fill with some first-round draft talent. Maybe trading back makes sense if they're not in love with the guy who's there, but they still need to address the quarterback spot.
I think it's interesting too, just because like now with Belichick gone and Brady gone, everybody's sort of looking at it like, all right, yeah, you let Tom leave. Granted, Bill probably chased him off a bit, but then you fired Bill and you buried him this offseason. Like, all right, like 80-something-year-old man and son with presumably some experience running a football team. You're in charge of fixing this and bringing us back to the 6 Super Bowl days. I mean, good luck with that. Like, good luck with how that pans out for you. You better. I mean, I think Drake May is a great prospect. I'll just say this: hadn't fared well for North Carolina quarterbacks going up against Jacoby Brissett. NC State's.
I knew we needed that in there. You're like Bobby Orchids? Is that
you mean the Florida transfer?
I will have. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the UF transfer. Yes, I like Bobby Orchids. That's great. I can't believe I actually repeated that. Let's move on to they would if they could is the next group: Broncos, Raiders, and Vikings. And I think basically the premise of this was. If you took these teams and swapped them into the places of Chicago, Washington, and New England in the top 3, where they were guaranteed to have a spot, to have a chance at one of the top 3 quarterbacks, they draft one in a heartbeat, and it's still very possible that they could draft a quarterback. How would you rank these 3 teams, guys? Dudes, you can start in terms of most likely to least likely to draft a quarterback: Vikings, Broncos, and Raiders.
I think all 3 are going to draft a quarterback, to be honest with you. It just depends on could the Minnesota Vikings get in that top tier that you have at the top, Will, when you talk about those top 3 teams. I mean, there's been rumors that Chicago and the Commanders have listened to calls, but they're going to stay pat. I think that's why I think the Patriots are a wild card. Could the Minnesota Vikings depend on what type of draft capital? Is it, 3 first-round picks to move up from 11 to 3 to try to get, their quarterback in the future, whether it's Drake May or if they're, touting J.J. McCarthy. When you look at the Raiders, I think they are going to take a quarterback, especially if a guy like Michael Penix gets past 12 to the Raiders. I think it makes too much sense. I think he'd be perfect in that offense with them trying to throw the football down the field. And I saw Brady earlier on HQ and agree with a lot of things he said. Like, honestly, Michael Penix is my QB3. I know people will bring up the medical issues, but if you're going off the tape, there's no way with your own 2 eyes you can't say he's not quarterback 3 based on the film, right? He's the best deep ball thrower in this draft. I love how he processes. I think he's the best processor in this draft as well. So I think it makes a lot of sense for the Raiders. Now, do they have to get aggressive and maybe try to jump the Denver Broncos in case Sean Payton wants to take a guy like Michael Penix? That is the question. And the thing with the Denver Broncos, yes, they did just trade for Zach Wilson. I don't think that absolves them at all from taking a quarterback. Would J.J. McCarthy be a good fit? There's been rumors that Bo Nix makes a lot of sense, but probably way too high to take him at pick number 12. Could they try to trade back and maybe get Bo Nix at the end of the first or early second if they get that draft capital? So I honestly think all 3 teams by the second round will take a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, Will, I'll rank them this way. I think Minnesota ranks number 1 because they have the draft capital to move up and actually, trade and make a selection at quarterback. So I'd rank them number 1. I think Denver's then number 2 for this reason. They don't have much draft capital. Like if they don't make a quarterback selection in the first round, you then all of a sudden feel like they're not going to make one that's going to be able to come in and start this year. So from a desperation or scarcity standpoint of picks, Denver would be number 2 in that regard. And then I'll put Las Vegas at number 3 of this group. And in part because you've got Minshew. We saw how he replaced Anthony Richardson last year once he got injured, came in, started, still gave them a shot to make the playoffs. So I feel like they could get through this year, even if they drafted a quarterback in the subsequent rounds, second, third round, a guy who needs to sit, learn a little bit, and eventually take over. So that's how I'd rank those 3, but I tend to kind of be with Leger here. I think they're all probably going to take a quarterback. Probably Minnesota and Las Vegas maybe in the first round, but I wouldn't necessarily say Denver wouldn't either. I mean, it's hard to believe that Sean Payton's going to go into the season with Zach Wilson potentially as a starting quarterback.
And Jared Stidham, Zach Wilson.
Either way.
Well, I think there's 2 really interesting aspects of these teams. Specifically with the Broncos and the Sean Payton thing. Like Sean Payton had a free out when he came to Denver last year. If Russell Wilson stunk, he was going to be able to blame everything on Russ. You knew that was going to happen. Russ can try and push back in the media as much as he wants and all that. But, the tape is out there of how Russell played. Sean Payton has, this long history of being a great offensive mind. Russell Wilson was on the decline when Denver traded, apparently when Denver traded for him. We didn't really know it completely at the time, but it looks true. And so, like, Sean Payton, quote unquote, won that battle. I think if Sean Payton goes into the season this year with Zach Wilson and Jared Stidham and the offense isn't good, then you are going to get the case of people asking questions about Sean Payton and was Sean Payton just a byproduct of Drew Brees? The other thing with the Broncos and the Raiders, if the Cardinals stay at 4 and trade and draft Marvin Harrison, all of a sudden the question becomes, would Jim Harbaugh be willing, and under that we're assuming 3 quarterbacks are gone, would Jim Harbaugh be willing to trade the 5th pick to the Raiders or Broncos to come get his guy, J.J. McCarthy? Because it would say so much about what Jim Harbaugh thinks about J.J. McCarthy if he let someone in the division trade up with the Chargers to come get the guy who won him a national championship. I don't think he would do that. But, man, if he did, it would be the biggest red flag of all time for J.J. McCarthy if he did that.
I was going to ask you, in one way that I look at that as like a red flag for J.J. McCarthy, but I think every coach would look at it and say, if you've got Justin Herbert, which we've heard Jim Harbaugh kind of ooh and ah about, Justin Herbert in the past, maybe you're okay with that. I mean, at this point, you've got to really look at it and say, I'm doing what's best for my roster. If someone offers me an offer that I can't refuse, that sounds rather rich, and I'm trying to build back up a roster that had some salary cap restructuring to do this year, be kind of hard to pass it up. I think teams have become a lot more friendly. Players become a lot more friendly, signing within the division, trading within the division, especially when it comes to the draft. Given how
a quarterback though is like you're signing this guy up to.
I would have on that, just because what if JJ McCarthy ends up being the guy that ends up taking it to you for the next 10 to 15 years? So I get on one point, Brady, because they need to get cheap labor, right? So trading back and getting a lot of rookie players makes a lot of sense for the Chargers, but I would find it hard pressed for them to trade it within the division. We do see it now. We saw it with the Detroit Lions and also Minnesota with TJ Hawkinson, which I thought was a surprise. You trading a guy to a divisional foe, but it's rare. Like, you don't see it that often.
And the Vikings facilitated the Lions moving up to grab Jameson Williams in the draft as well. So like those two teams have sort of been a little incestual,
friendly
fire. Yeah.
Let's not forget, like, you're talking about this from the Jim Harbaugh angle. What about from the Tom Telesco angle? There's that element of it too, where he knows a lot of the folks back there. So maybe that actually helps facilitate a trade more in getting the deal done. We tend to think that just because you're division rivals, that's what doesn't allow teams to create trades, but it really comes down to relationships and, you know, how those trades are orchestrated. So that's the one thing that kind of stands out to me. And I know you're going to kind of probably push back on that, given your extensive knowledge of Jim Harbaugh, but I also feel like there's an element of that that's out there.
Why would I push back on that? Given I do have extensive knowledge of Jim Harbaugh. I feel like I've studied Jim Harbaugh carefully over the years.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I would say too about in division trading, I've always been of the mindset, if you allow somebody to move up in the draft, you're taking away a lot of assets from your opponent that they can be used to build out the roster. So I don't think it should be something that people are wary of. I also have the wild card tiers on the quarterback desperation tiers. I'm trying to hit my marks on these ads. Got to pay the bills. You guys, you have no idea how much it costs to keep the lights on at the Pick Six podcast headquarters or wherever. I had the Giants and the Titans listed as the two wild cards here. I'm sure that Titans fans are going to yell at me, and that's fine. They drafted Will Levis in the second round. I think when you draft somebody in the second round, it doesn't preclude you from replacing them if you think that you have a quarterback out there. I don't think they're going to do it. But they're there in the spot. Everyone's just penciling in the whatever top offensive lineman is left for the Titans. Dudes is hazing me on the Zoom call yesterday when we're doing. I was like, I kind of want to take you. He goes, no, just take the best tackle, Brinson. What are you doing?
He was
just
trying to take a receiver, Brady.
I was going to take Roma Dunze. I don't think it's that crazy, but
Will Levis will be on his back.
One, I would say, Brady, what do you think about these two wild cards? And then two, is there anybody else you would add into that category?
So I don't know that I guess I would actually. I wonder, as far as adding teams, I wonder what, like, Arizona.
They
were a little bit higher.
A good one.
I left Arizona out of the article accidentally because I had them as a wild card, and then I was like, I don't know. And frankly, I was actually going to list the Chargers as a wild card. Just I could see,
so there's like three teams, or I should say four teams when I look at this list. I think Seattle definitely would be in the wild cards for that.
That's a good one.
They for sure would be. Arizona, if they were like top two, top three, that would be a team that I would say like is in a similar situation, maybe outside of Kyler Murray's contract, having to figure out how to offload that, where maybe they would consider it. You've got the Dallas Cowboys with Dak going into his final year. I know Trey Lance is on that roster, but that would be an interesting one to discuss. And I think Pittsburgh's other one's like, you're not paying much for Russell. You're not paying much for Justin Fields. Omar Khan's come out and said basically that, like, it's not outside chance they don't, they might draft a quarterback. So those would be the few teams I throw into it. But I think the Giants are one that I would for sure put in they would category.
Oh, okay.
So that's a team that, for your reasoning about Will Levis in Tennessee, I wouldn't put them in they would. I think he did enough last year to prove getting a shot this year. But I think the Giants definitely are a team that they would if they were just a little bit higher in the draft. So I'd put them up.
So the Giants are sitting at 4 already. It's just we're taking one of these 4 quarterbacks, or at least if they're at 3, they're like, we're definitely taking.
I guess my thought there would be, you're thinking in your mind like you hope someone drops to us, otherwise we'll just get through this year with Daniel Jones and Drew Lock. Yeah. Because if you are in like the top 3, top 2, you're sitting there saying to yourself, "Oh, we're definitely going to take a quarterback. Let's try to figure out a way of offloading one Daniel Jones when he's healthy, if we can, right? Like that would be some of the thought process, I think. But again, you're not offloading that contract, so they're kind of stuck with them for the rest of this year.
I like that. I think that's a good call too on Dallas and Seattle. And yeah, Omar Khan said they wouldn't draft one in the first round, so that's the only thing. It's hard because you don't. Everybody might, tons of people might draft a quarterback, but you gotta, kind of, yeah.
It's easy to say that if you're a top 4 pick, top 3 pick, then maybe you would be. But obviously Pittsburgh's not there, so it's kind of a hypothetical. But
for sure,
I'm saying it's easy to say you're not going to take one in the first round if you're not drafting in that position.
Actually, dudes, I had Dallas taking a quarterback in my worst mock draft ever that came out today. So maybe Dallas should be a wild card. Any thoughts on teams to add or the teams up there?
Well, yeah, I think the Giants are definitely going to take one. And Brady, you know this, and you can speak to this. New head coaches and GMs always want to have their handprint or attached to a quarterback of their own picking. And the Giants have not been able to do that with GM Joe Shane and Brian Dable. Remember, Daniel Jones was kind of adopted to them. So, like, to your point, Brady, if a quarterback falls, or even if they get aggressive and try to move up to 4, essentially, depending on what the Cardinals want to do, I could see them for sure selecting a quarterback. Me and Brady did a mock draft about 3 weeks ago, and I actually had Michael Penix going to the Dallas Cowboys because I thought that made a lot of sense with Dak being in this last year. Another rumor I've been hearing, the Atlanta Falcons could be a sneaky team, which I know is crazy because they just paid Kirk Cousins, $50 million a year for 2 years. But just imagine a guy being able to sit behind Kirk Cousins for 2 years if they're able to maybe trade back a couple spots and take a quarterback. And I heard they've done extensive work on Michael Penix Jr. So I think they're a wild card sneaky team that could maybe, everybody's mocked them taking the edge guy. I think they could be a sneaky team to potentially take a quarterback.
Will, you brought up the Rams. Well, why not throw them in that group?
I think the Rams are another one too.
By the way, the Joe Fortenbaugh tweeted this out today. Joe Fortenbaugh of ESPN. I don't remember if he's been on the pod or not, but good dude. Prop bet: Chargers to draft a quarterback with their first pick. Market open 100-1. Yesterday 15-1. Today 6-1. What about? I mean,
whoa.
That's, look, again, reactive, not predictive, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the idea there is like,
because he's close with JJ McCarthy, you figured, is that the thought process with it? Because it really doesn't make sense otherwise when you have, you're drafting to find that guy. You already have that guy, Justin Herbert.
Correct.
Yeah, and the only real logic that, and it's not really logical because I've done the math on and look, the salary cap is what it is in 2024, but you would be taking like a $63 million cap hit for Justin Herbert, even if you traded him, I think. So you'd have to trade Justin Herbert to the Vikings for Justin Jefferson, and then you have Justin Jefferson, you draft.
It's funny
JJ McCarthy?
Because on my Sirius XM show,
it's actually not a bad idea.
It's not a bad idea.
It's not a bad idea. Now you say that. Like,
I was trying to do it in that mock draft today, and I was like, got too convoluted with it because I was like, then the Vikings wouldn't move up in the draft. Like, do you trade? Do you swap picks, or is it just like Herbert for Justin Jefferson straight up, and then you take McCarthy at 5?
Well, you would need more picks than that. The funny thing is, Brinson, somebody brought this up on my Sirius XM show the other day. It was a Minnesota Vikings fan. They were like, well, Jim Harbaugh really loves JJ McCarthy. What if we package a deal to send Justin Herbert and the Vikings give up, their next 3 first-round picks? And I'm like, I think Russell Wilson went for 3. For Justin Herbert, you might need 4 and a couple other picks. Now, it depends if they also send Justin Jefferson in that package. Then
if you said Justin Jefferson 11 and 23 for Justin Herbert, I don't know, man.
That maybe gets it done. But the cap ramifications, I don't know how that would work with Herbert's deal.